The French Ministry for Foreign Affairs. I like foreign languages.
Yeah, yes. Good evening. Would you please take your seats? So, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, dear panelists, guests, colleagues, friends, it's a great pleasure to open this public panel discussion today on the topic of European strategic autonomy in the Western Balkans. My name is Ralf Melzer. I'm the director of the regional office of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung based in Sarajevo. In March 2021, around 1 month after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the European Union's foreign and defense ministers adopted the Strategic Compass, which offers also tailored partnerships for the Western Balkan countries in order to promote participation in the common security and defense policy. The Russian aggression against Ukraine definitely brought the Western Balkans back in the focus and on the strategic map, which also means that we need to engage more strategically in the region. And this challenge in particular is important in relation to Kosovo, and therefore we are very happy, and it's a pleasure and honor to have Mr. Besnik Beslimi with us, the first Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration, Development and Dialogue of Kosovo. And Mr. Beslimi will later give a keynote in order to discuss what European strategic autonomy should mean for Kosovo. I'm also happy that this public event today is the opening of a workshop that we're going to have tomorrow, a workshop that will discuss many of these aspects that we will touch already today. And that's with a group of experts and practitioners that has been established in March of this year as a platform of reflection and to discuss the country's perspectives, the European country's perspectives, and priorities and sensitivities when it comes to the EU strategic autonomy in general and the Western Balkans in particular. And that means that we want to discuss tomorrow the concept of European strategic autonomy, not only in relations to the national perspectives, but also in relation to the EU enlargement and the European political community initiated by President Macron. I would like to finish my welcome remarks by expressing my thanks to all who have contributed to make this event possible, which means, of course, the colleagues from the FES offices in Sarajevo and in Pristina, but also our partners, in particular the French-Austrian Center for Rapprochement in Europe, Florent Marciac, our dear friend and partner who is co-hosting this event, but also Yannis Armakoulas, also a close friend and partner of FES in different working lines. So you were both among the initiators of that working group, and it's great to have you here. And I'm very much looking forward to our exchange. I'm pretty sure that we have a constructive and fruitful discussion. And with that, I'm handing over to my colleague René Schlee, who is heading the Kosovo office, for his welcome address. Thank you very much for your... Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ralf. As Ralf said, I'm here the resident representative of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation for Kosovo and North Macedonia. It is my very pleasure to welcome you here for two reasons, and to have this public discussion on the strategic autonomy for two reasons. First of all, part of our program is to strengthen Kosovo as a partner for peace and security in the region, and I think it is very important that we have these discussions taking place in Pristina physically. Although sometimes it is more difficult to different visa issues. But to come here and to gather such a fine assembly of experts, come here and discuss the issues with experts here in Pristina. And the second reason I'm very happy is because, well, for the issue, the European strategic autonomy, I think the tension that there is between, let's say, ambition and implementation, I think from Pristina's eyes, it cannot be much starker, the tension. Yeah? And this is why it's a pleasure for me as a pro-European, almost of religious conviction. Yeah, it is always very hard for me to read speeches of Mr. Borrell saying like, now the European Union needs to learn the language of power, and now we need to project. And then on the other hand, reading the news that once again we couldn't find agreement on such, let's face it, in the end, trivial technical issues such as the visa liberalization. Yeah, and the contrast between this and how to navigate between these let's say these different poles between an ambition and a European Union that can project power and be a beacon in the world on its own, and on the other hand, the complex political realities on such, let's say, if we take a very naive view on it, as I said, trivial measures, of course not trivial for the Kosovo citizens, such as visa liberalization, but in the great scheme of things, trivial things such as visa liberalization, I think it's good to be here in Pristina and to discuss this. And therefore, I'm very happy that the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Besnik Beslimi, agreed here, because I think he can put such much more meat to what I just outlined, and of course gives an overview what it looks like in terms of from the Kosovo government as what the current stance of strategic autonomy looks like. I would like to say and echo Ralph's statement of thanking very much Florent and Ralph for your partnership. Yeah, I would also like to thank particular thanks to Besa Luja, who's our program coordinator with this, and of course in true fashion she just left the room I'm probably organizing something, so thank you very much, Besa, wherever you are. And with this I would give it to Besnik Beslimi, to the Deputy Prime Minister, for your welcome remarks. As you prefer. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this roundtable discussion today on the European strategic autonomy in the Western Balkans. I will not go and repeat the particularities of the situation that we face right now: pandemic, energy situation, commodity prices going up, war in Ukraine, the unity of Europe and approach to that. But I will start with the conclusion that you also made, that this will mean that Europe needs another strategic approach, and this would also involve the Western Balkans. If you look at the Europe, you have several territories or regions like Mediterranean, Scandinavian, Baltic countries, Central Europe, Western Balkans. So maybe the first question we should discuss is what makes Western Balkans so particular that we always put an emphasis on Western Balkans. Why we say, well, we need to change our approach, there is a new strategic momentum, and we cannot move on with the old philosophy in Western Balkans. What makes Western Balkans so particular? One might think that it has to do with the fact that Western Balkan is not fully a member, or the Western Balkan 6 are not fully members of the EU or in the process of integration. Others might say because of the tensions that are around. Others might say it has to do with the proximity to the EU, which makes Western Balkans an attractive region to create distractions from the war in Ukraine. But there are several factors that make the Western Balkans very important currently on the security dimension. And because of this, all discussions that we have on the implications of the war in Ukraine, say that we need to reflect, we need to change our approach. Yes, security is not crucial, but in addition to this, we need to develop new policies and others. My impression is that this discussion is not only at the academic level, but it's also a level of the EU. So even at the EU, the bureaucrats are discussing the need for a new approach to reflect, to see how they can accelerate the process of EU integration of the Western Balkans, but this is where it stops. So the goal is just to recognize that we need a new approach, but this is not converted into acts. I have not seen, since the start of the war in Ukraine, a single decision of the EU that shows that we have reflected. I haven't seen a single decision where EU says we have learned the lesson, and this is our response to this. I mean, we learned the lesson with respect to our approach in the Western Balkans. Actually, when you go there, it's business as usual. So, for example, now with the visa liberalization, still the debate at the EU level is, but we have done this with Qatar and Kuwait, it's not a new instrument, it's business as usual. So nobody is willing to say, well, come on, it's a new momentum, the credibility of the EU is at stake, we cannot talk business as usual now. We have to deliver something, and we have to deliver in the short run. And it's not that we are delivering something without the product being produced there. So because the same EU concluded that Kosovo has fulfilled all criteria for visa liberalization in 2018. Now they updated the report, they said it's much better than anticipated. And EU concluded that there will be no new conditions and criteria for Kosovo. And then at one point, when the discussion at the lowest bureaucratic level starts, somebody says, yes, but there is a system ETIAS. So this is even worse than business as usual. This is a lack of willingness to engage. If you tell to the citizens, yes, but we have developed an instrument, we never know whether it will be implemented, but until it is implemented, there are no visas for you. But be happy, go and celebrate, because it's a big victory. At the political level, we decided to grant you visa liberalization, is a joke with the citizens. Now, how can you expect to keep the credibility of the EU alive if you are not even able to deliver a very symbolic gesture, which is not necessarily a concession at all. It's something that was already achieved. So for me, this is a momentum that shows that EU so far has not learned the lesson or was not ready to move to a new set of instruments and tools to address the situation in Western Balkans. I have seen a similar tendency also with the country reports. We received the country reports last week, and when you read through them, you see the same approach of the EU as it was in 2018, 2019, 2020, and so on. There is no change at all, not in the recommendations, not in the evaluation, and also not in the vision. There is zero vision in these country reports that have been submitted. In addition, actually we see a tendency from the EU to boil down eventual problems that might change the stability within EU. For example, when you read the report for Serbia, it says on the external relations, Serbia continues to remain committed to good neighborly relations. This is in the country report for 2022. So in 2022, the relationship between Serbia and Croatia are at the lowest level possible. Serbia has almost provoked a dismantling of Bosnia and Herzegovina. They brought the government down in Montenegro. That the military makes flying around Kosovo border, and they are not aligning the foreign policy with EU, which means tensions with Romania and Bulgaria. But still the EU report says that they continue to remain committed to good neighborly relations. EU tells the Kosovars, you are not supposed to align your foreign policy with the EU, but we are happy that you have aligned it 100%. And still in the progress report, they say some progress in Kosovo in aligning its foreign policy. For the same alignment, in North Macedonia, they say very good progress in aligning the foreign policy. So you see this fulfillment with double standards that try to achieve goals that have nothing to do with this declared objective strategic autonomy and response to the particularities of the region. Everybody says, well, democratic values are important in the region, building democratic systems, rule of law are important, but when you read the reports from Brussels or when you meet bureaucrats in Brussels, the only element that they are interested to know is dialogue with Serbia. Whenever I also meet diplomats in Kosovo or I go to Brussels, the first agenda item is dialogue with Serbia. It means to us, Kosovo is still reduced from the perspective of the EU only as a mechanism that exists there to dialogue with Serbia. Not a country that has citizens, that has preferences, that has an economy, that has ambitions about this GDP per capita for the citizens, that has some institutions of rule of law, that want to bring some order there. But the only question is, did you progress in dialogue with Serbia? And progress always means, did you make some concessions? So because we expect you to be constructive. So Kosovo is the good kid. If you want to prove that you are a good kid, you have to continue with concessions because you know Serbia is difficult. So the exogenous variable is the stance of Serbia, and then the role of EU is to work together with Kosovo to accommodate this. But for me, this is in complete contradiction to the conclusion that the region is becoming, though, in the security aspect, important for the EU. Because when you say the region, you can start by listing different sources of tensions, like Bosnia and Herzegovina on the source, Montenegro is a source of tensions, Kosovo is a source of tensions, but actually all of this is not true. There is only one source of tensions, that is in Belgrade, because all countries have issues with Belgrade, and as Prime Minister Kurti said, this is only because Serbia doesn't know its territory and its borders. Serbia sees the countries around them as a supermarket, then they can go and serve themselves with the territory. When I ran through your initial notes here, it was for me very important to look at this sentence. We said, how do EU priorities for the region intersect with new overarching objectives? I also see here this tendency that still the situation in Balkan is not seen from the region, but from the perspective of EU. It's not what the region needs, what the interests of the countries are, and to see how we can bring this in line with the EU priorities and others, but what EU wants from Kosovo, what EU wants from the region. And I think as long as we don't show the strong willingness to change this narrative, we will continue to have the same debate of how important the region is, but this will still be an academic debate. We will not be able to convert this into decisions on the EU level. When you look at the country report, despite the shortcomings of the methodology that is used, we can see that Kosovo is showing the highest progress regionally and also the highest progress historically. I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that this have somehow put EU in an awkward position. Now Kosovo looks like the student that has the best performance in the test, but has received the lowest grade from the EU. Because pretty much Commission is telling us all countries in the region deserve the membership status. You still don't have the membership status because you are still behind. But in the performance, you had the best performance. So it either means that the teacher is having a problem to evaluate students, or the student is cheating on the exam. And EU, the report has decided to conclude that we have cheated in the exam. So they're playing down our success. For example, we managed to increase our exports by 67% in only 1 year. The report says limited progress because you have not adopted an amendment of the CEFTA regulations. But all the legislative documents have a purpose. They want to promote an area of development. For example, the legislation in the area of external trade have the goal to increase the volume of trade. Now we have increased the volume of trade by 2/3, and the report says, but that's not important. What is important is that signature in one amendment. That is what is seen in the report. So I have the impression, I have to say, that these conclusions that you find in these roundtable discussions do not make it to the level of changes in the decision making at the EU level so far. I hope it will change. If not, I think that also the unity of the EU will not last forever. So because the challenges that we have from the war in Ukraine are not equally distributed among the member countries. You cannot say Portugal and Hungary are equally being affected from the war in Ukraine. And if they're not equally affected, it will be impossible to maintain this unified approach to the Ukraine war for a very long period of time. And then the momentum to have a meaningful intervention in the Western Balkans will be lost. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Beslimi. Thank you a lot for this keynote speech. Well, you've already stated the scene of the discussion in many respects, and we will engage with that. I will invite the panelists to join in the panel, our 4 panelists, to join. So thanks a lot for joining tonight. My name is Florent Marciac. I am Deputy Secretary General of the also French Center for Rapprochement in Europe. Together with Yanis, we launched this initiative a couple of months, beginning of the year, to try to engage precisely with the capitals on these issues of strategic autonomy and how to boost the interests, the strategic interests of the capitals for the region. So this is a little bit part of these discussions we are trying to encourage with experts from different capitals, from also countries which are not usually the usual suspects. And I'm very glad today to have some of our colleagues here on this panel. Mr. Beslimi has already put, I think, the scene, and it's not a very rosy one. You know, if you look at the paintings of surrealists, and I'm not going to this example exactly, but any painting of surrealists, what is striking, whether it's Dali or Magritte or Chagall, is it's a mix of reality, but it could be even credible reality. What you have, it's realists in some way, but it's subverted. It's a subversion of realism. And what's behind these ideas, when you see these, it creates a kind of unconsciousness. It speaks to you at a different level than just reality. When the EU started to claim that it's becoming a geopolitical power or geopolitical commission, it will learn the language of power. That was a little bit the feeling I had. I had the feeling that I had the markers of the European Union, the reality ones, so the Commission speaking and talking about big budgets, geo-economic power, if you want. But something was just not wrong, not right. Something was striking. I was not sure what it was. And somehow Mr. Beslimi summed it up very, very well. After 6 months of a conflict which has been the epicenter of geopolitical disruptions, the question is, has the EU changed in any ways in its being? Has it become a different, like a phoenix? Has it been reborn as a geopolitical power? Well, we see that the EU is sending aid, a lot of aid to Ukraine. Now the Commission is speaking about 1.5 billion monthly from next year, on par with the US. We see that Ukraine and Moldova have received candidate status as if it were game-changing factors. There are certainly symbolic, very important signs. We see Bosnia has being recommended for also candidate status. So we see a couple of changes, it's true. But deep down, how much has it changed? Deep down, in the past 6 months, how much has it changed? We still have, I think Mr. Beslimi mentioned it, we still have this issue of visa liberalization, which we could not overcome, and this is in the hands of the member states. We have the issue of recognition, just speaking about Kosovo, which we could not overcome, and this is again in the hands of the member states. We have a dialogue with Belgrade, which is parasitated also by these issues of non-alignments and a very questionable standing in Belgrade towards Russia, and acknowledgement of this special relationship by our commissioner. So we have this business as usual, which seems to prevail, and that's a little bit this picture, surrealist picture. And I would like to start reflecting on this disconnect between what the EU would like to be, or how it would like to show itself as a new entity, and we'll discuss the European Political Community Initiative also in this respect, and the reality of its movement, the inertia. I'd like to start with you, Yanis. Yanis, you're a senior research fellow at ELIAMEP, also professor at University of Macedonia. The question is as simple as that. Has anything changed very fundamentally in the approach of the EU? Has the EU become, do you see signs that the EU has become more geopolitical in its approach towards the region? And if yes, what does it mean? How do you see that?
Thank you, Florent. Well, it's a difficult question because I would like to say yes, but I'm afraid it's not true. I mean, it's not really, the evidence is not really there to say that the EU has changed. A lot has changed at a declarative level. There's a lot of talk about the importance of the Western Balkans, the importance of the EU becoming more geopolitical in the region and the neighborhood, but that the evidence, I mean, to be geopolitical, you actually need to show it in practical terms. You have to be more confident in your moves. You have to go beyond the difficulties in deciding on certain issues, like we mentioned earlier, the visa liberalization, or start to having more unity when it comes to moving forward the perspective of certain Western Balkan countries. Where do we see change? We do see change more broadly when it comes to the questions of European security, the way it's seen in Germany, for example, the way it's seen in France. But that's more broadly about the European level and certain key member states and the way they see the future of the continent, relations with Russia and so on and so forth. We have seen change when it comes to addressing the problem of energy dependence, which is part of obviously the broader strategic picture, but we should not forget that decoupling from the dependence on Russia is pretty much led by the diplomatic initiatives and economic initiatives, geopolitical initiatives of the US. It's not so much run by the EU. So we do see, for example, the region, the Balkan region, gradually becoming much more independent from Russian energy, but that's not really the initiative of the EU. Where does the EU can make the difference? The EU can make a difference if it's in a position to make the Balkans and beyond, the Eastern Partnership countries, part of the wider picture of European integration. And this is where actually the real change of the EU can come. Because let's face it, it's not the military power of the EU that matters in these cases. It's not the diplomatic strength or the diplomatic initiatives of the EU. In all these fields, the US has the primary role, right? If there is one thing that the EU can offer in terms of strengthening Europe's geopolitical role and making the role of these countries in the European affairs more integrated with the EU, is actually by making the membership in the EU more credible. And this is not happening. It certainly was not happening before the Russian invasion, and I don't think it's happening since. Whether we will see it in the future, it's very doubtful, because also, and we will discuss this, all the discussion around the European political communities, I'm not sure it's actually clarifying the situation when it comes to enlargement or not. So to cut a long story short, I don't think we have seen actions on the part of the EU matching the expectations or matching some of the declarations about the geopolitical role of the EU. We have seen some movement, but it's definitely not enough. And in certain areas where the EU could make a difference, we haven't seen really any serious progress. It remains to be seen, I think.
Yanis, you mentioned the European political community, and I'll come to Clotilde about that, because that has been one of the initiatives brought by President Macron in France to address these issues on the political level and get the member states more on board. It follows up different types of engagements which were considered as missing, including in the region. If you look at the Berlin process, complementing somehow the accession policy. So if you look at the rise of intergovernmentalism in the EU, so this level of engagement, which was deemed as missing, but still, we have a European political community which we don't understand. We don't understand what binds the members of community together. It doesn't seem to be democratic values. We have Azerbaijan, we have countries with very questionable, but this was the initial plan of President Macron. So this has been dropped on the way, on the path, so towards a more geopolitical one, but it's also not so much a more geopolitical one where it's an anti-Russian alliance, because we have also countries like Serbia as following a course which is certainly not anti-Russia, and we have also Armenia, which, the fact is the fact, they are a member of the CSTO and member of the Eurasian Economic Union. So we don't understand very much what is this new political construct. I think also in the region there is a lack of understanding about how to engage with that. Clotilde, can you try to explain to us what is binding the members of this community together, and what is the potential of it?
Thank you. So I see.
You're policy advisor. I forgot to introduce you.
Okay.
We know one another quite well, but so you're policy advisor at the Center for Analysis, Planning and Strategy at the Foreign Ministry in France.
Yes, that's the policy planning of the French MFA, and that's why. Okay, no, yeah, it does work. So I was listening to you and to all of you, and being that a bit pessimistic, and maybe I would like also to go and to more deeply to dive in the European political community. But, well, it has been said that there was a lot of academic blah blah in a way on the new, Zeitenwende, or the new paradigm, strategic paradigm. But I think, and you all stress on the fact that there is not that much engagement and not that much progress, or not new ideas, and business as usual. Okay, and with very concrete things, pointing the fact on visa liberalization or the candidate status, and I do understand that. But maybe because it's our work at the policy planning, I would like to maybe give a broader view of all this context. And so, as you asked me to go to the particular European community. So first, maybe I would like to stress on the fact on what the EPC is not, because there have been a lot of fog and speculations among the EPC, and so it is. Well, it's not a format to engage Russia, nor Belarus. It is not, of course, an alternative to enlargement, because at first there was this suspicion as well, and it is not an alliance providing security guarantees. And it is not even an EU-centered imperial project. So it is a way of gathering the European family, which in a way Putin has defined to us. And it is everything on this continent that is not Russia and that needs to consolidate because of Russia. So, of course, everyone can have their opinion, and I heard you, about whether this applies to Azerbaijan or Serbia or even Turkey, because you didn't mention Turkey. But in the end, there was a consensus that it's better to have them in than out. And so if I come back to the Prague summit, it has gathered 44 states, and in a way it has made it possible to have this kind of strategic conversation that was needed. And we saw it also on the aside meetings and informal meetings that were settled and were not planified, and I can also talk about the trilaterals between Scholz, Macron, and Vucic, or even Osmani. So, I mean, that was seen as very useful, and also it has something to do with this new strategic approach, and according to me, it is a concrete realization of what is this EU, the geopolitical EU, and it is not another organization. It's more, as you see, like a G7 or a G20. It is a very important political object, according to me, because it is needed. It is less technocratical. You all mentioned all these chapters, clusters, or conditions that have to be met and that are considered not to be met. Well, the European political community is not on that. It's not only, we can discuss this, but it's not only on enlargement, because there are many countries in it which do not seek for being part of the EU or even have chosen the exit. So, but also I would like to make like 3 small comments before, and I'm open to discussion, of course. But we saw that it is a way to encourage partners in official and non-official discussions. It is also a real way of gathering the European family all together. And also, it is to put every state on an equal footing, which I see as very important. So I think also that the choice that has been made to organize the future summits or in non-EU countries, countries which are candidate or countries which are not, like for example Moldova and then the UK, are good signs of what can be done at the EU level, and it will be a manner to have, I mean, to have these kind of discussions that can be made only among the wider European family. So I try to bring some optimism. I'm not sure I convince everyone, but of course.
I'm just wondering because the ambition of the European political community somehow is directed towards partly, but towards the bigger neighborhoods, including Russia. So it is also partly about that, how we should respond geopolitically to this challenge, how we should bring together the nations of the European continent. But I'm just wondering, because indeed we are discussing about what's happening between Azerbaijan and Armenia. We are discussing these high political topics. But it seems to me that we have also high political topics within the EU or with the countries in the region, including Kosovo, which us, member states, are not able to solve. Why are we trying to do something in a bigger framework, which we cannot succeed in a smaller one? That's a very simple question, and that comes to you, Ruth. Ruth, you're a professor at the Complutense Institute for International Studies in Madrid. The non-recognition of Kosovo, but it's not only, I mean, the question of visa liberalization will come also to Clotilde. But the non-recognition of Kosovo is one of these issues where the member states of the European Union do not hold the same position. And this impossibility of converging on a position prevents the EU from having a position too, a substantive position, I mean, on the matter. That is somehow a weakness or vulnerability in the geopolitical context which we have now, which is extremely, we become more problematic. Ruth, do you see that the position of Spain, which is grounded for very good, solid national reasons, do you see that with a geopolitical context, that might be rethought, that might be taken a different reading, or that we might need, and how we achieve that to make this kind of political decisions?
Okay, I was afraid that you're going to focus just on that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I want to link with Clotilde's arguments on the European political community, and I want just to say one thing, that this is the European political community is more a Euro-Atlantic political community focused on how to be joined against Russia than something else. And I think this is more political than economic or sociological or whatever things. So that's why it's not based on values. It's because there's some pragmatic interest, strategic interest, and they want to be together in this kind of G7, G20, in this case G44, right? Joint group of countries which are together because they are afraid of Russia. So I think that we have to put it in that context. And on the no-recognition issue by Spain, I can't talk by Spain because, I was the case. Obviously I know better. I think there's not going to be a change in position at all, because the arguments that have been used by the officials, by the MFE, is that there is no any hole into the geopolitical or geostrategical position of the European Union because of no recognition of Kosovo. That Kosovo and Serbia should, I'm not a public servant, so I'm not talking, this is the speech and the arguments given by the MFE. So the argument that they say, it's basically Pristina and Belgrade had to have an agreement among them, and we are not going to put any obstacles on that. And they're very clear, mentioned in the Article 35 of the enlargement with Serbia, which basically said that they just going to recognize any agreement with any conditions which is linked among the parties. So as far as Kosovo and Serbia reach an agreement, Spain is going to recognize immediately after that. Before that, I hardly see any other progress in the recognition of Spain. However, I should say that I had recently had some interviews with the people in charge of these issues and in the issues relating with visa liberalization negotiations, and they said that they will be very proactive. As a matter of fact, we all, I think, see this big flexibility or more flexibility on meetings among officials from Spain and Kosovo. And we've seen Pedro Sanchez and Alvin Kurti in Prague, one by side, and this kind of picture had never happened before, like 2 years ago. So I think there has been some flexibility on the relationship between the leaders. I think, I was told basically that there will not be any obstacles as far as technical issues can be solved on the visa liberalization, and that Spain is going to work on the same basis without any obstaculization of the negotiation process in other issues besides recognition. So that is the position that has been accounted by the Spanish officials. Besides, they also mentioned that it is needed that in the case of Kosovo, they should put more focus on things that are written on the reports of the Commission, like strengthen democracy or strengthen the rule of law, fight corruption, legislative measures according to the EU rules and regulations, and go to a step cooperation on war crimes issues or nothing else. But as a matter of fact, more than that, it would not be progress without normalization among the countries in the region. I should say that when you talk with public servants in Spain, with the ones in charge of the technical matters, they are all very clear on this point, which is we are going to stick on the regulations of the European Union, so are not going to be other issues being affected by that, like political matters, as you just introduced, that the internal issues of Spain. So the civil servants basically are very clear on that and say, no, we are working on the normal basis, we are working, trying to working with the progress of Serbia and Kosovo and Bosnia based on the rules and regulations and without taking into account any other issues as domestic issues. But when you go through the politicians, these things change. Because of course they don't know a lot about Balkans, and they're especially the mainstream political parties, center left and center right, they are linked the situation of Kosovo with the situation at the domestic level. But at the technical, the ones who are in the COWEB or in other committees at the Brussels level, the situation is, the arguments are totally different. Besides, and I want to add this, in relation, talking about Borrell, when he was Minister of Foreign Affairs, he was trying to basically decouple the situation of Spain or from the situation of Kosovo. And when he arrived in Brussels as High Representative for Foreign Policy, basically he was pointed out that we needed to be more geopolitical power and we had to start from the Balkans. And I think he was trying to go through that. And the first visits he paid was on the region. And however, I think now there is also time for the countries to deliver to the European Union. It's not just the European Union, and I said European Union is European member states, because you had to convince them. It's not the supranational European Union, it's the countries. And at some point, I had the feeling that the delivery of the Balkan countries, in this case Kosovo or Serbia, if you want, are not delivering to the member states as in the way they are expecting to do so.
Yeah, that's very much the tricky thing. As you say, so for Spain, an agreement between Serbia and Kosovo is needed. On the other side, the persistence of the disputes and the absence of agreement for whatever reason allows Russia to maintain a foothold in Serbia, to be useful to Serbia in this negotiating power with Kosovo. Now, the geopolitical strategic, the strategic autonomy of the EU, or this quest for strategic autonomy, would advise to get rid of these disputes. And I think here all the member states would concur with that. We need to get rid of these disputes. But yeah.
For just 1 second.
Please.
Do you think that, of course, we are all agreed on that no disputes, better for everyone, right? But what about the countries? Go ahead and, give the first step and try to solve all this regional cooperation.
That's why I'm coming to Andiluce. So the absence of resolution of these disputes creates some kind of vulnerability for the EU because of this foothold. Now that we have facilitated a dialogue for 10 years between Belgrade and Pristina, Serbia and Kosovo, and we don't have so much the impression that we are much closer to an end, a successful end to this dialogue. And I think citizens in Kosovo also, 70% say they are very unsatisfied with this dialogue. And Diluce, do we have a problem with the way the EU is trying to support a conclusion towards an agreement, whatever kind of agreement it is, but it needs facilitation of this dialogue? And do we have an issue in how we engaged on that?
Thanks, Florent, and thanks for the invitation. It's really good to be in Pristina, always. Can I just comment on EPC? Clotilde, I know you're not the mastermind of EPC, but for us to think of EPC as a community, or as you and I discussed, as a forum, where everyone would be brought together so that no one is left out. I mean, wasn't this the approach with Russia for years? And look where this brought us, this approach. Let's not leave Russia out. It's better to have them in so that we move together. And so just to point out, I mean, I know this is, you're not to be blamed for this, but for the sake of argument, I wanted to point this out, that to go about in this way, to still think that if we bring all the countries in, like Turkey, I mean, I'm glad to hear that Turkey is being treated as European family, but in reality, I don't think that's what Europe does with Turkey. But anyhow, I just wanted to for the sake of argument, to say that. On Kosovo, Serbia, I want to, just recently I had to do some work on Montenegro, so I want to bring this in as an example and to also point out that in the Kosovo-Serbia process, I think there are many faults with the approach used so far, but one of these faults that and I mentioned this before elsewhere, it's that EU had to realize from the beginning, and this is where I want to bring in the Montenegro example, EU had to realize from the beginning that it is a party to this dispute. It cannot be neutral. It is not neutral. This status neutrality, it really doesn't make sense. It's not logical. So when I say it's the party to the dispute, it's because Kosovo and Serbia is a European problem, the dispute. And so it is partly EU to be blamed that Kosovo is an unfinished business. And this goes all the way back to, I mean, it goes further than Bud Intercommission, but I would just go back to Bud Intercommission for now, when Kosovo was not treated as a constitutive element, but it was treated as part of Serbia. And so EU treated this problem with a very short-term institutional memory. So they just looked at 89 and then they decided, okay, it's part of Serbia, we go ahead, we treat Serbia as a republic, Kosovo is part of it. But then, you know, many mistakes were repeated. And I think the last one was in 2010 when ICJ came out with an official opinion saying that Kosovo did not breach international law. And then Europeans insisted at UN to come up with a resolution to continue talking about the dispute. Anyhow, but the way that the approach has been so far is that I think EU does not want to admit that it's a party to the dispute. It wants to play the role of a facilitator. And so you can't be a facilitator and an adjudicator at the same time, because then EU is supposed to also, watch after the implementation. So this is the main problem that I see. In the case of Montenegro, I mean, I know many people argue that it was with the consent of Serbia, but when Montenegro wanted to become independent in 2016, Javier Solana, High Representative, was kind of overlooking this process. He was very involved into this. And I think everything was done not to let Montenegro separate, but still. I mean, even the bar was brought for the referendum. The bar was brought to 55%. In the rest of the world, it's usually 50%. If you vote 51%, yes, you then separate. But in Montenegro, it was brought up to 55. Anyhow, Montenegro has voted close to 56. And then what happened the following days, which is really important, which is why I think it's one of the reasons where EU failed with Kosovo, is that EU as a unit came out and recognized Montenegro. And then countries bilaterally, in the following few days, really it was few days, recognized Montenegro bilaterally. So you can be, as Europe, a geopolitical player. You can. It's really not that complicated. But with Kosovo, this is not the case. And like I mentioned, there are many reasons why we ended up here, nowadays. So, and now with the war in Ukraine, we constantly say, oh, the war in Ukraine has given new impetus to enlargement, to this and that process, to Zeitenwende, so on and so forth. But it takes a war in Ukraine to realize how, all the repercussions that the disengagement of the EU from the region in the past 10 years, the repercussions of that. So it doesn't look very good. But still, even with the war in Ukraine, we have a situation today where we get a message from EU that Bosnia it's recommended from the Commission that Bosnia should get a candidate status. So let's assume that they will get a candidate status in December. And then what? What are the next steps? Can EU deliver the next steps? So this would be the question that I would just like to leave out there. With Kosovo, the expectations have been raised in the past few weeks that there will be visa liberalization for Kosovo. And then on Friday, we get all these. I happen to be here, so I was only reading the media here mainly, so the media was not really positive. It was highly skeptical that EU is putting more conditions, Kosovo at the moment is being looked into this. The issue of visa liberalization for Kosovo is being looked into parallel with Qatar. I mean, seriously, Kosovo still is being there are deliberations whether Kosovo needs a visa liberalization or not, or it deserves or not. So this then in relation to the dialogue, I think, to send signals like this in a very bad faith, so not in good faith, from Europe to Kosovars that you have to wait a bit more, but we want you to be constructive on this and that and this and that. I don't think it works like that. I don't know. I mean, I just don't see a positive ending. So I'll leave it here and then we can...
I'll come directly to Clotilde then. You can already think about the questions. We'll shortly have a second round. Clotilde, this visa liberalization issue. I mean, France France has said, we re-engage in the Western Balkans. France has been indeed trying to re-engage together with Germany, alone, economically, trying to regain foothold in the region which it had been quitting somehow. And it has pushed for a new methodology, which then has brought hopes that France would try to bring bring behind the changes, keep attention to it, and now this issue of visa liberalization, France has been is blocking that. Although signals were good that it would go. Here we are very much very confused. Can you tell us a little bit why France is somehow shooting its own foot in its ambitions? I'm not talking even about the implications for Kosovo, but the diplomatic ambitions of France in regaining some political weight in the region and in EU affairs by doing that.
Thank you for the question. Well, I know it's about credibility, and I'm not the spokesperson of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, but anyway, on this issue of visa liberalization, you are, of course, aware that it is in the hands of the Ministry of Interior. So, you know also our national context, which is tricky. We'll see in a few years, but there is, I mean, we are facing, and you can see even this through our National Assembly and the recent elections, we are facing big problems with our far-right party, which is gaining more and more seats. So there is a kind of crystallization of all these. And when you think the country will go forward, then there is this step backward. And that's, you know, it's not only about France, and you know about the commitment of our country for and towards the Western Balkans, and I think it has been very clear during the French presidency. But at the same time, and you know also that we do hold a position in favor of visa liberalization, and President Macron was very clear on this. It was an agreement in principle. And then now, it's not only France, but also some member states who have raised some technical issues regarding security issues and migration issues. And I mean, what else can I say? I know I'm not going to convince you, but, and I know, I mean, but you are, I mean, you are all here that you know how much foreign affairs and domestic affairs are just intricate. And this is the way it is. So, you know about a commitment of France because also of the different visits. You know that there will be a delegation of the two ministries at the beginning of November, Ministries of Interior and Ministry for Foreign Affairs. You know that our Secretary of European Affairs, Laurence Boone, is about also to visit Kosovo. I mean, I think these are clear commitments about the fact that our country is ready to have open discussions and to talk about this issue of visa liberalization as well as the bilateral cooperation.
And we'll certainly have questions from the audience, which are less, but Yanis, can I come back to you shortly about bilateral dispute? Different issue, but it's not a new one. It's not a new one, and in the Eastern Partnership, the Eastern partners, as Mr. Beslini was mentioning, the fact that we should also listen to the needs of the partners, the need to engage, that the EU should engage in mediating bilateral disputes was there among the Eastern partners. The EU has been always a bit reluctant to deliver on that. Do you think that in a new geopolitical EU, the EU should indeed engage more systematically with bilateral disputes, and how should it be doing that in a more geopolitical way?
Yeah. Well, it should, but the reality is that there's no easy way for the EU to do that. So what is the? Let's start with the basics. What is it that the EU does not have? The EU does not have, for example, strong diplomat. The EU, not individual member states, right? Not France or whatever, Germany, does not have EU. The EU does not have diplomatic capacity to intervene in areas outside Europe, right? Does not have the diplomatic culture of mediating in disputes. We haven't seen the EU playing any big role in disputes in the MENA region or beyond, right? It's not the EU that actually does mediation. It is individual member states, organizations, but not the EU. It does not have a military clout, with the exception of France, right? Maybe Germany in the future. Maybe Germany, maybe in the future, we'll see. And also the military clout that member states have, there's no culture of using it in order to shape conflict dynamics in the neighborhood, like, you know, Americans do it, even the Turks are doing it, right? So all this the EU does not have, and the US have, and other actors have in the wider region. I mean, other actors, even smaller actors than, even to some extent Turkey and others have. So what can the EU offer? I mean, here is where I will become a bit, how to say, not very palatable to the French, I think, to you and Clotilde maybe. I mean, the main instrument that the EU have is this amazing vision that in a united Europe we will be all together in the same house, and countries in the Balkans will start becoming more and more look like the societies, the institutions, the democracies will look like Western European countries. This is what the EU has. It's its model, right? And unless you're willing to export that model, and quote unquote export, unless you're willing to share the vision of this beautiful future in the EU with other countries that you see as unstable, as weak, as problematic, as whatever problems in general in the Balkans or in the Eastern Partnership, unless you're willing to actually really realistically see your future together with these countries, I don't think you have a clout. The main instrument that the EU has, and it has been very effective in places, let's take the Prespa agreement, for example. Without the promise of EU integration, there was not a chance in a million years that a country would change its name because a neighbor demanded so, right? The only reason this happened is because there was a promise that Macedonians and Albanians in North Macedonia will eventually become EU, members of the EU. You know, that's the only reason why they accepted to compromise. So the only real clout is the attractiveness of the European model and the hope and the perspective that was given during the Greek presidency 20 years ago. But this, of course, as we all know, is not there in the picture anymore. It's not in the horizon. Funds is the other thing that the EU can offer, but as we all very well know, funds alone will not do the trick. The EU, even today, gives a lot of money in the region compared to what China, let alone Russia, that gives zero, almost close to zero. But still the EU, because the EU is not visible, because the EU is not credible in its promises, etc., that money does not have any political impact in societies. That's why if you ask the average Serb, they will think that they get more money from Russia than they get from the EU, because the EU is not actually serious in all these things. So funds are important, but they are meaningful if there is a perspective. The perspective is absolutely necessary. Then there are other things that we can discuss, for example, in terms of the future of the European strategic autonomy, how the EU should develop policies in a pan-European perspective, like food security, energy security, infrastructure, connectivity. All this should be done now with the inclusion of the entire Balkans. There's no I mean, it's unthinkable why the EU still, for example, plans certain things without the inclusion of the Western Balkans. So these are, and okay, I see you want me to stop.
Finish your sentence.
Yeah, the sentence, okay. So I think that the membership perspective is absolutely necessary. And to make it a bit more, how to say, hopeful or also optimistic for the EU, the membership perspective gives opportunities to the EU that no one else, not even the US, can have. Because this is how, this is what transforms societies, and this is really what I call in my work the deeper impact of the EU. I mean, you cannot have, even with the US diplomatic efforts, you cannot have a country changing its name unless you promise European integration.
So the biggest overarching challenge for the EU is of course our security and so on, but this is to keep this attractiveness of this model without which it will be completely powerless. Ruth, you wanted to react to that?
Yes, I wanted to react because basically I don't know at this point. We always disagree, yes. At this point, what is the European model means? And I think what we've seen in Ukraine, what we've seen in the southern border is the failure of the normative power of the European Union since it started the wider Euro philosophy in the European Union. So the thing when Borrell came with we have to speak the language of power is the recognition of a failure, that we are not able to explore our model because it's not working outside these some countries. So we have to think something else. And on the other hand, I think we are in a very deep crisis inside the European Union. We are defining what is the European model, which kind of democracy, which kind of rule of law, which kind of internal organization we have to reach with that. And I think this is a tricky thing, and it has an impact on the Balkans, because also there are some these kind of issues involving the approach to the Balkans. I mean, democratic backsliding in Hungary or in Poland or, if you want, in Malta has an impact on the Western Balkans. And if you have an ally in Belgrade and if you have an ally in Bosnia, as it is the case for Hungary, I mean, that's scary for the rest of the member states also to do that. So that's why I think the European reports on Western Balkans are very focused on how these countries should strengthen their democratic structure, their rule of law, the compliance with normative rules and regulations of the European Union. And that was my point to you. But I have another point for her. We can. No, I was quite surprised, but we can discuss this tomorrow. Yeah.
Just the last thing, and so there is, and you bring it very well, there is a link, and that's a little bit the complex thing. There is a link between the internal debates in the EU and the external model, either towards the Eastern Partnership or towards the countries in the region. And this link can be also illustrated differently. If the countries join the European Union will not remain the same. Now you have different ways of thinking about the solution here. Either you say, first we figure out what we want to become without you. We prepare the ground, then you come. That would be maybe some countries' way. Or you can admit the fact that indeed we can only know on the way, but the EU will change. And Janusze, what would the EU look like in your thoughts, if we had, because if we keep continuing targeting just EU integration for integration, imagining that the EU will not change, we are just pretending that the EU would not change through accession of new countries. What should be needed for the countries of the region to join as change within the EU so that they anticipate these kind of changes?
Okay. No, I think there has to be a joint reflection on two levels between you know, the member states and the aspiring countries, which is Western Balkans and Eastern Partnership now. So the first reflection should be on how to enlarge but also deepen at the same time. And this conversation should be had with the aspiring countries as well. So the new methodologies and all these different ideas of staged accession and so on and so forth, I think will not be so successful if a joint conversation is. So Europeans need to talk to aspiring countries as well at different levels. And then I think, so no matter how many processes there are, because there are many ideas floating of single market, of these countries joining the single market first, the Green Deal agenda, and so on and so forth. So no matter how many of these processes are set off, if there is no consolidation of democracy, but not only in the aspiring countries, as Ruth mentioned, or Yanis, one of you, the case of Hungary and Poland and so on and so forth. So it's not going to be a successful process. You can have countries, you know, say that they agree with, like in Sofia, Berlin summit held in Sofia in 2020, the leaders of the Western Balkans signed the Green Deal agenda, and they committed on paper. But then if you look at some of the city planning reports, in Novi Sad, for example,